As a brief introduction, my name is Ryan Root. I studied biochemistry and hormones in college. I've been in this industry for over 2 decades. I've successfully guided many thousands upon thousands of people through the use of hormones, which means I've aggregated more empirical data than any endocrinologist, urologist, or physician could have, unless they had my history. This is one of the first videos I've done. I originally wanted to start with the basics, how to design a TRT protocol, but there is a narrative being promulgated over Reddit and other TRT help forums that may be beneficial to some, but is misleading and pernicious to others, to many. The first thing that is important to understand about Reddit and other TRT help forums is that there are places for people who need help. These forums are an accrual of people with problems. When reading a help forum, you are inculcated with horror stories and problems to the point where you may begin to believe that adverse side effects are much more common than they actually are. 90 to 95% of the people who commence a TRT protocol immediately dramatically improve their quality of life. They do not come back to Reddit and say, everything's great. Well, see you later. They simply move on and live their dramatically improved quality of life. Therefore, the audience on Reddit and other TRT help forums is not an accurate representation of a real sample set of society. It is an aggregation of anomalies. I like Reddit and TRT help forums because they are helpful tools. If you're experiencing a specific side effect, it is beneficial to see how others have dealt with that side effect. On the other hand, I have seen Reddit scare people who would benefit from testosterone out of using TRT. Certainly, caution should be used when considering TRT to make sure that you meet all the criteria and that you understand what you're getting into. Hahowever, alarmists are so concerned with preventing people from using testosterone unnecessarily that they don't think about the flip side. Their overabundance of caution is unnecessarily preventing people who need testosterone from using it to dramatically improve their quality of life. Most people who use TRT benefit from it. And after experiencing the immensely positive results, they tend to get angry because they feel duped. They feel duped because all of the information they have learned from their physician, from their peers, from help forums was the wrong information. The most common refrain I hear from people who commence TRT is, I wish I had started TRT years ago. For those of us who have a vast amount of knowledge in the hormone industry, we see two main reasons for the promulgation of myth, abysmal vice, and toxicity. One, when people believe everyone is the same and that their own experiences or what they have seen from others is exactly how everyone else should act, react, and behave. And two, when people begin to regurgitate the antiquated notions and dogma from the medical community, um, which is decades old, biasly views testosterone as dangerous, refuses to keep up with contemporary knowledge and evidence, and notoriously establishes poor protocols, poor understanding of hormones, and poor results. A personality trait inherent within most people that causes the dissemination of misleading information, especially on these TRT help forums, is the inability for most people to see outside their own self centricity. Most people assume that what worked for them and a couple of their gym buddies should work for everyone without the slightest consideration of differing genetic predispositions. Many people do not understand there's a massive disparity between between the way each individual reacts to different compounds and different hormone blood levels. Consequently, when you have a TRT subreddit or a TRT help forum that accumulates an audience of people with similar problems, they tend to speak as if their personal experiences are gospel, when in fact, their experiences are atypical of the greater population. Within the TRT subreddit or other TRT help forums, there exists a subset or a cult of people who convince themselves that testosterone should rarely be used. Only in instances where people have medically low testosterone, below 250 nanograms per deciliter, according to the low end of the ranges utilized by the medical community. These ranges are arbitrary and rooted in nothing real. These ranges simply stem from an aggregation of data, of the blood levels from people who have taken these blood tests in the past, typically older, sick people. There was never any research performed to prove that 250 nanograms per deciliter or above is quote unquote normal, and that people should feel optimal at that level. We see in the field that most people begin to feel suboptimal at below 700 nanograms per deciliter, and Below 500 nanograms per deciliter, people begin to live lives of despair. To think that anything in the range of 400 nanograms per deciliter or below is quote unquote normal is ludicrous. No one feels good at that level. The cult of people who believe that the use of testosterone should be parochial in nature or narrowly restricted have also commenced fat shaming, as well as shaming people's life choices, stating the common refrain that if they lose weight and made positive life changes, their testosterone levels would dramatically change for the better. Many believe that testosterone levels lower when people become overweight and unhealthy. However, in the field, we find that the reciprocal is true. Most people are overweight and unhealthy because their testosterone levels are low. Contrary to popular belief, most people notice very little or no change in hormone levels from losing weight and making positive life changes. Positive life changes will positively affect testosterone, but often it is only a very mild addition to their total testosterone. From a vast amount of experience, although positive life changes are enough for some people, it is not for many people. The minimal addition of testosterone from positive life changes is not enough to feel any difference. Again, many people themselves or they know a guy who was able to make significant improvements from diet and exercise, and therefore they're unable to see outside their own self-centricity, causing them to incorrectly believe that everybody should be able to replicate that scenario. Many believe that overweight people should be able to motivate themselves to lose weight before they commence TRT. This stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of biochemistry and what causes motivation. Dopamine causes motivational salience. Therefore, motivation is another word for an uptake of dopamine. In order for humans to produce dopamine or motivation, we have to receive a reward or positive results from an action. If someone has poor genetics for hormones or they never learn proper diet and exercise, and they do not notice any appreciable results from diet and exercise, they will not produce dopamine and hence will not have the motivation to lose weight and improve their aesthetics. If dieting and exercise does not yield any positive results, human nature will motivate them to stop exercising and eat comfort foods, which will will elicit the production of dopamine. This becomes a negative reinforcing cycle. For an overweight person with low testosterone, the introduction of testosterone, which is itself dopaminergic and increases metabolism, which aids in fat loss, will suddenly allow a person to see results from diet and exercise, eliciting a strong dopamine response, motivating them to continue to exercise and to continue to clean up their diet. Testosterone creates a positive reinforcing cycle that jumpstarts progress and motivates people to continue a dramatic life-changing path. Additionally, within the TRT subreddit or other TRT help forums, there is formed a cult of low-dose TRT evangelists. These low-dose evangelists believe that 60 to 120 milligrams of testosterone cypionate per week is the maximum dose anyone should take, and that the blood testosterone levels in the upper normal range of 700 to 900 nanograms per deciliter is optimal and maximal level for all humans. The low dose evangelists also go as far as shaming anyone who prefers 200 milligrams or more of testosterone per week, using language that has developed negative connotations such as uh, PEDs or cycling or steroids, even becoming angry, acrimonious, and discriminatory against people who simply feel better using 200 milligrams of testosterone per week or more. Congratulations to those that have dialed themselves in and found that they feel better on low dose testosterone. But the fact is, from a vast amount of experience and empirical evidence in the field, we see most people feel better with perfect health markers on a dose of 200 milligrams or more. Again, if you happen to react better on a lower dose and you surround yourself in a community that evangelizes low dosing, it is difficult for people to see outside their own self centricity that there is a bigger world out there with a myriad of possibilities outside what you have experienced. Carl Sagan and Nassim Taleb, in his book, The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, famously quoted, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Let me say that again. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because you and a few others react well to low dosing is not evidence that everyone will. There are a myriad of reasons why people subsume myths and false narratives, of which we will delve into later. But one of the reasons people give as to why they adamantly object to doses of 200 milligrams per week or total blood testosterone levels over 1,200 nanograms per deciliter is that they believe it's dangerous and could lead to long-term health consequences. Although has been evidence of very large doses of testosterone and its derivatives exacerbating health conditions when taken at abusive levels very long term, doses of 200 milligrams per week or a little more, or blood testosterone levels of 1,500 nanograms per deciliter per week, or just doses of, or blood levels of 1,500 nanograms per deciliter, have never been correlated to long term adverse health consequences. Naysayers will regurgitate the medical community's insistence that we don't know how these hormones will affect people long term. Bullshit. People have been administering doses of 200 milligrams with levels around 1,500 nanograms per deciliter beginning in the 1950s, and there has been no evidence that these moderate doses carry any long term consequences. Quite the opposite. I personally have witnessed thousands upon thousands of people taking doses of 200 milligrams per week, many taking more, for decades with no adverse long term consequences. Millions of people have been taking a dose of 200 milligrams per week or more to their benefit for the last 70 years. Plenty of empirical and anecdotal data exists, yet the medical community refuses to bone up on contemporary knowledge and acknowledge current empirical data and the superabundance of anecdotal data. Invariably, everyone reacts differently to hormone levels, dosing protocols, medications, and blood test ranges. Total testosterone is just one factor of a myriad of factors that determines how we react to testosterone treatment. As an analogy, scientists conducted a massive research project on the number of genes involved in determining a human being's height, finding that over 20,000 genetic factors were utilized. Most physicians only look at total testosterone and maybe free testosterone to gauge how a person is reacting to testosterone. But that is only two genetic factors, where there are likely thousands of genetic factors that determine an individual's reaction. What about frequency of androgen receptors? Some people have more androgen receptors than others. Someone with a low frequency of androgen receptors would need more testosterone to have the same results as someone with a higher frequency of androgen receptors. What about binding affinity of testosterone to the androgen receptor? What about potency of the cascade effect after testosterone binds to the androgen receptor? How much does the cascade effect hypertrophy an individual's muscle cells? How much does the cascade effect increase the amount of dopamine and dopamine receptors? How much does the cascade effect increase red blood cell count? The potency of testosterone's cascade effect would differ for each individual. These are three more examples of factors that determine the effects of testosterone that no one considers. And there are likely thousands more factors that we don't even understand or know about. Here, I want to introduce the concept of varying levels of androgen sensitivity, specifically low androgen sensitivity. Low androgen sensitivity is not uncommon in the general population. I was going to dive into it here, but there is too much. So I will succinctly sum up and do another video later on solely on low androgen sensitivity. People with low androgen sensitivity will need higher amounts of testosterone to have the same effects as people with normal androgen sensitivity. Simply having testosterone level of 1,500 nanograms per deciliter doesn't do anything, doesn't mean anything, positive or negative, because testosterone doesn't do anything until it binds to the androgen receptor. Once testosterone binds to the androgen receptor, it can still dissociate too quickly and fail to complete the process and fail to have its cascade effect. That is yet another factor of variability in causing low androgen sensitivity that no one considers. Low frequency of androgen receptors cause low androgen sensitivity, and low binding affinity to the androgen receptors causes low androgen sensitivity. Imagine if you have a low frequency of androgen receptors and low binding affinity of androgen receptors, then you will have a very low androgen sensitivity. There are a myriad of more factors, but now we are getting the idea of how the genetic lottery can cause varying positive and negative effects. Now I will explain low binding affinity. Amino acids are the building blocks of life. A chain of amino acids is a peptide. For instance, HGH is a 191 amino acid chain, which is a peptide. A very long chain of these amino acids, or multiple peptides bound together, form a protein. Proteins fold into conformations that perform actions. An androgen receptor is a protein that has folded into a conformation to bind a ligand. In this case, the ligand is androgen such as testosterone or DHT. I wanted to find a video or a picture of a ligand binding to a receptor, but I couldn't find any good material, so I have to use my hand. There is a base structure necessary to form an androgen receptor, but there is some variability in the way it forms. There are binding points on the receptor that are perfectly aligned with a testosterone molecule. As the testosterone molecule floats by in your bloodstream, it is attracted to or binds to the androgen receptor. Now, again, there's variability in these binding points of contact. So somebody with a um, low binding affinity of the androgen receptor will have fewer binding points. So when the androgen receptor floats by, it won't be as attracted to, and it may just float by and not do anything. So in this case, you would need more testosterone in your blood to increase the chance that a testosterone molecule floats close enough to just bind to the androgen receptor. Again, with more binding points, some people have more, some people have fewer, some people have normal. The testosterone, can float by a little farther away and still be bound because there's enough binding points and enough attraction there. So people with a lower binding affinity of testosterone to the androgen receptor will need more testosterone than a person with normal binding affinity to have the same effect. Why do people appropriate myths, false narratives, and form cults to deter people from adequately utilizing testosterone? There are likely a myriad of reasons why, some of which we've already gone over, but here are a few reasons that make sense. To illuminate one area where testosterone epistemology and ontology is flawed, where education and understanding is lacking, I would like to introduce the concept of varying degrees of low androgen sensitivity. Testosterone in the blood has no effect, positive or negative, whether it is 250 nanograms per deciliter or 2000 nanograms per deciliter, until it binds to the androgen receptor and completes its cascade of effects. The reason testosterone binds to an androgen receptor is because it happened to float close enough to an androgen receptor to bind to it. The reason 250 nanograms per deciliter is not enough is because the lower amount of testosterone lowers the potential for an androgen or a testosterone molecule to float close enough to bind to the androgen receptor. Otherwise, if it floats too far away, it will just float by and not bind to the androgen receptor, and there will be no effect. It is more about the frequency of testosterone binding to the androgen receptors than it is about total testosterone level in the blood. For the reasons stated earlier, sensitivity to testosterone varies with everyone. 900 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter affects everyone differently. Someone with low sensitivity to testosterone may need 1,500 nanograms per deciliter or 1,800 nanograms per deciliter to have the same effect that 900 nanograms to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter would affect a person with normal sensitivity to testosterone. No one ever considers this when discussing testosterone blood levels or dosing protocols. As I stated earlier, the medical community believes testosterone and its derivatives may be dangerous and should only be used in the most parochial of circumstances. Specifically, not because they have knowledge of the subject, but because they notoriously have a lack of knowledge regarding the subject. Many people tend to believe that if you maintain a level over 1,200 nanograms per deciliter, you may experience long-term health consequences. However, there is no evidence in the 80 years people have been taking far-ranging doses of testosterone. There is no, I'm sorry, There is no evidence of this in the 80 years people have been taking far-ranging doses of testosterone. There isn't a specific range. I'll say that again. There is not a specific range that will universally cause a problem. If testosterone is going to exacerbate an adverse health condition in an individual, it will manifest itself through drastically increased creatinine or C-reactive protein, drastically increased hematocrit or hemoglobin, or drastically increased heart rate or high blood pressure. If someone has a blood testosterone level of 1,200 nanograms per deciliter, but their hematocrit, blood pressure, and heart rate is significantly elevated, and they try to maintain that level for a decade or more, despite manifested health concerns and elevated health markers, then they may develop long-term health consequences. If a person with low sensitivity to testosterone has a total testosterone of 1,500 or 1,800, but the rest of their health markers are adequate and not problematic, then a wealth of empirical and anecdotal data indicates there will be no long-term health consequences. Remember, the fact that there is any amount of testosterone in the blood does not mean anything, positive or negative, until it binds to the androgen receptors. When humans form a belief, especially when that belief comes from someone we consider to be respected or highly credentialed, such as the believability of a physician, it notoriously becomes difficult, if not impossible, for people to change their minds. There are evolutionary mechanisms and reasons for this, for which I will make a video later because it is fascinating. Cognitive dissonance will not allow most people to change their mind even when presented with facts contrary to their belief. Say, from a guy who has studied solely this specific field for over 20 years, who potentially has more experience than any physician or anyone in the entire country. Dr. Yuval Noah Harari wrote a fascinating and popular book entitled Sapiens, which defined that a major reason for human progress was due to our ability to unite under fictions or beliefs. Humans are the only animals that will unite in massive populations under beliefs, such as governments, monetary systems, human rights, sports fans, and capitalism. Frequently, we see people uniting under beliefs to form cults, sects, factions, groups, and movements for a wide variety of shared ideologies. Uniting under beliefs is responsible for a massive amount of progress made in human history. Unfortunately, is also responsible for insidious and toxic beliefs such as racism, Scientology, the war on drugs, and the misinformation regarding testosterone and its derivatives. When you have a large trusted institution, such as the medical community, that has inculcated itself with misinformation, that misinformation promulgates, and it takes a very long time to shift a paradigm into a more progressive understanding. Again, such as with the medical community and the misinformation regarding testosterone and its derivatives. What has developed is sects or factions consisting of people with a more progressive understanding from contemporary knowledge and research, and those that still conform to antiquated notions and dogma from the old paradigm. Finally, it is inherent within human nature to desire to keep that which benefits us a secret. This tendency is driven by evolutionary mechanisms. In the caveman days, keeping food sources or good hunting grounds a secret would ensure your own survival. When people gain an edge, they typically like to protect that edge and prevent others from attaining it. This is why some people do not want others to use testosterone and gain the same edge that they have. Additionally, I have noticed a sense of jealousy coming from the low dose evangelists. Many people are able to take 200 milligrams per week of testosterone, or a little more, without any adverse side effects. And they tend to look and feel a little better than those who use a lower dose. Some people are prone to side effects from 200 milligrams per week of testosterone and simply cannot use that much. On a side note, this is where derivatives with lower side effect profiles, such as nandrolone and oxandrolone, could come into play to help further reduce symptoms of hypogonadism without adverse side effects. For the low dose evangelists, one way to make themselves feel better about taking low doses when others praise the effects of taking higher doses is to demonize those taking 200 milligrams per week or a little more and make it sound as if they are deviants, using stigmatized language to describe their behavior, such as cycling or steroids or other vituperative. What you learn when you start to become adept at understanding hormones is that we cannot put everyone in a box and decide that everyone needs to be at a certain range, a certain dose, or a certain protocol. There is a massive disparity between the way each individual reacts to different compounds, different blood levels, different doses, and different treatment protocols. Let me give you an example. I have guys that have estradiol in the hundreds. They feel fine. They have no adverse side effects. Estradiol is important in males. It does have protective functions. It's neuroprotective. In fact, if I get these guys down to 70, to an estradiol of 70, they start to have side effects of low estradiol because it's more about the ratio of testosterone to estrogen than it is about the actual number itself. I have other clients who get estrogenic side effects when their estradiol reaches into the 40s. So I have to adjust their protocol to keep their estradiol below 40. Now, with those two massive disparities on opposite ends of the spectrum, how would I ever put everybody in a certain range and say, I want everybody in this certain range? The answer is that you can't. And anyone who tries to do that is not good at this because that's not how this works. There are many complexities that we cannot measure. And because we can't measure most of the complexities, the numbers don't mean much. It is not about putting everyone in a box and maintaining everyone at the same blood level range, the same dose, or the same treatment protocol. Again, anyone who does this is not good at managing TRT. Unfortunately, using predetermined protocols is unfortunately using predetermined protocols for everyone is how most physicians and the greater medical community treat hormone deficiency. Everyone is vastly different and is better optimized at different ranges and different doses. Again, I reiterate this because it is important. It is not about putting everyone in a box and using cookie cutter solutions for everyone. It is about developing a methodology to figure out what yields the best results for each individual. How do we do that? I will delve into that in future videos.